Imagine that a terrible catastrophe has happened around you, and you do not even suspect it. There is radiation in the air, the water is contaminated, but no one talks about the danger. This is how many people in the Soviet Union lived. In those years, any accidents and disasters were carefully concealed. The Soviet authorities were afraid that the truth would spoil the image of an ideal country in which there could be no disasters and mistakes. For example, after an explosion at a nuclear facility that released radiation into the atmosphere, tens of thousands of people continued to live on the contaminated land. No one told them what was happening. People went to work, children played outside, and the radiation slowly killed them. Many did not learn the truth until decades later, when it was too late for rescue. The Soviet government did everything it could to cover up such incidents. Officials were afraid that the truth would undermine confidence in the government. Because of this, thousands of people died without knowing that radiation had caused their illnesses. Survivors said, "If we had known earlier, we could have avoided these diseases." The most shocking thing is that such accidents happened more than once, and people died without ever knowing that their health had been sacrificed to preserve the myth that the Soviet system was flawless. Did you know that one of the biggest nuclear disasters in the world took place in the USSR, and almost no one knows about it until now? The Chelyabinsk 40 catastrophe, the forgotten tragedy. Imagine you live in a small town, and suddenly an unseen danger descends on your settlement. You continue to go to work, send your children to school, but the air you breathe and the water you drink are deadly. In 1957, in the closed city of Chelyabinsk, 40, now Ozersk, there was an explosion at the Mayak nuclear plant. The explosion threw a huge radioactive cloud into the atmosphere, which covered an area of more than 20,000 square kilometers. But the authorities were in no hurry to save people. Evacuation began only 10 days after the disaster, when many residents had already received lethal doses of radiation. People complained of strange illnesses, but no one could understand what was happening. A simple example, residents of the villages that were under the radioactive cloud continued to drink contaminated water and work in the fields contaminated with radiation. Even after some people were evacuated, the area remained contaminated. To this day, many areas are still uninhabitable and still have high levels of radiation that are life-threatening. It turns out that, even after decades, these lands carry death. What's scariest is that people only learned about the incident years later. Today, the affected areas remain an exclusion zone, with radiation levels many times higher than the permissible norms. You can imagine, the catastrophe happened more than half a century ago, but its consequences are still felt today. But how could it happen that one of the largest radiation disasters in the world remained unknown? And what else did the USSR authorities hide? Kishtim accident. Why it was kept quiet. Imagine that you live near a river where you swim and fish every day, and the water seems clean and safe. But no one tells you that the river is contaminated with radiation. This is how thousands of people lived after the Kishtim accident, about which the USSR preferred to keep silent for a long time. In 1957, there was an explosion at the Mayak plant that released a huge amount of radioactive waste into the environment. Most of this waste ended up in the Tekya River, which flows near many settlements. Local residents continued to use the river, not even realizing that every drop of water was life-threatening. They bathed, fished, fed their livestock, and used the water for farming. Many of them later contracted cancer, but no one realized the cause. The Soviet authorities did their best to keep the consequences of the accident quiet. Thousands of people who suffered from radiation got cancer, but they were forbidden to talk about it. Those who tried to raise the issue were threatened with reprisals. People were simply told that they were sick for other reasons, and no one recognized the connection between the disaster and their illnesses. Moreover, to this day, the Teka River remains polluted, and its waters are dangerous to life. Numerous settlements along the river have been evacuated, but there are places where people still continue to live near this deadly river, unaware of the consequences. It's scary to imagine that such a disaster could have remained a secret for decades. Have you ever wondered how many more such tragedies could have been hidden from people? And most importantly, how many lives could have been saved if they had not kept silent? Why is one of the biggest radiation disasters in history so little known? After all, if such a tragedy had happened nowadays, it would have been talked about on every corner. But in the USSR, a lot of things were hidden, and the accident in Chelyabinsk 40 is no exception. The authorities did everything to keep the disaster a secret, and even decades later, people know little about what happened. It was only in 1992, 35 years after the accident, that the government officially recognized that there had been a disaster at all. Before that, it was never mentioned on TV or in the newspapers. But thousands of people who were affected then lived in the contaminated zone and did not even suspect it. Many died of cancer, not knowing that their health had been destroyed by radiation. It is frightening to realize that this accident has not yet received proper coverage. If, after all these years, we know so little, how many more such disasters could remain hidden from us? These disasters have changed the lives of thousands of people, yet they are hardly talked about. In the Soviet Union, accidents were hushed up so as not to tarnish the image of an ideal country. But such tragedies as the explosion at the Mayak plant and the Kishtim accident should not be forgotten. These are not just pages of history, they are lessons that can help prevent similar disasters in the future. To this day, people affected by radiation from these accidents are still struggling for recognition and compensation. Many of them lost their health and loved ones, but never received any help.